keine blauen Karten angenommen werden. Meine Damen und Herren, wir wollen heute mit dieser Debatte des Beginns des Ersten Weltkrieges vor 100 Jahren gedenken. Im Jahre 2014 ist diese Menschheitskatastrophe in allen Debatten gegenwärtig. Wir werden heute sicher auch darüber diskutieren, dass die Bestialität dieses mörderischen Konfliktes, die Sinnlosigkeit dieses Massensterbens die Menschen bis heute zutiefst verstört. Dieser erste industrielle Krieg in Europa war ein Krieg, in dem die Moderne zum ersten Männer als Soldaten unter Waffen standen. Und fast jeder Sechste von denen
à l'égard de la prospérité et de la sécurité de tous. Honourable members, ladies and gentlemen, 100 years ago, the German Empire, Austria-Hungary, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Portugal, the United Kingdom, the kingdoms of Bulgaria, Italy, Greece and Romania, the Russian and Ottoman empires, Serbia and Montenegro, to name but the European countries, clashed in a terrible war. The savagery which had started in Europe then spread throughout the world. 100 years on, the European Union has proved that it is effective in organising life in such a way as to ensure that there is a much more decent world. It can and must contribute to shaping globalisation that protects and defends that which is universally human in mankind. And yet, we see in the eastern neighbourhood of our European Union two concepts of Europe contrasting each other. The one of a modern, open, democratic Europe, in which 28 countries have voluntarily joined up in the European Union to realise the most revolutionary progress in the history of mankind in terms of relations between countries. And against this old concept, the old concept of a Europe, which continues to think and to act in categories of power, spheres of influence, diktat, mistrust and the logic of rule and divide. When we compare these concepts and when we recall that the First World War was followed by the Second World War, it is fair to say that we have already drawn our lessons. The European Union is our lesson of two world wars and must remain so in the future. If at all, as a result from the events in Ukraine, there is a new lesson to be drawn, and it is the one we must never, I repeat, never, take peace and stability in Europe for granted. We need to defend peace of the work which, under these circumstances, you have done. Responsibility, solidarity, leadership were elements which eventually made us succeed together. The job is not done. Too many citizens still feel the painful consequences of this crisis. Our fight, in particular for sustainable growth and against unemployment, must and will continue. Many of you are now going in different political parties to run for elections for the new European Parliament. I wish you all the best for your future. I hope that the next European Parliament will remain a driving force for a united, open and stronger European Union. I thank you for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Herr Barroso. Das Wort hat jetzt für die Fraktion der Europäischen Volkspartei Herr Daul.
Monsieur le Président, cher Martin Schulz, Monsieur le Président de la Commission, cher José Manuel Barroso, Monsieur le Président du Conseil, cher
Herr Farage.
Thank you. In your introduction, you said that the First World War was an industrial war. And indeed, you've only got to drive 2 hours up the A4 from here and visit the battlefield at Verdun to see exactly what you were talking about. For those that haven't visited, I think it's probably the grimmest battlefield I've certainly visited on the Western Front, or indeed anywhere in the world. And it was something that had such a huge psychological effect on France that it very much dominated the thinking of Marley and Schuman post-1945 that this awful thing must never happen again. And those of us in politics will all remember the rather famous photograph of quite a large German Chancellor Kohl and a rather small French President Mitterrand holding hands, standing in front of that ossuary at Douaumont. And so the whole European project comes from the disaster that was sparked by the First World War, and it is entirely understandable that people should have sought ways to prevent such awfulness. The difficulty is that they chose the wrong target. Monnet and Schuman decided, and it's shared today by Mr Barroso and the Cohn-Bendits and others, they decided that it was the existence of nation-state that led to war, and therefore we have to abolish nation-state. Actually, what we should have focused on post 1945 isn't the abolition of states, it's to make sure that the European states were democratic, because democratic nation states do not go to war with each other. So I have to say that I believe the whole European project is based on a falsehood, and it's potentially a dangerous falsehood, because if you try to impose a new flag, a new anthem, a new president, a new army, police force, foreign policy, whatever else, if you try to impose that without first seeking the consent of the people, you're in danger actually of creating the very nationalisms and resentment that you sought to snuff out in the first place. We've done this all before. We did it after the First World War in the Balkans. We said we can't have all these little Balkan states going around fighting with each other. Let's bring them together. Let's give them one flag, one anthem, one president, and let's call it Yugoslavia. And it led to horrific wars since 1990, the deaths of tens of thousands of people as people have fought to get out of a false state. The European Union is making a very similar mistake because there is no consent for this project. I've heard people this morning talking about the need for a United States of Europe on a federal model. You can only have that if people give consent for it, and nobody has. And when you put the Constitution to the peoples of Europe, the first time you really come clean with the electors, they rejected it. I'm not against Europe, but I'm against this Europe. I want a Europe of independent, sovereign nation states that trade together, that work together, that cooperate together, and I believe the European elections this year will mark a turning point. The tide is turning. You're backing an outdated model that seeks to get rid of a problem that actually hasn't existed since 1945. Thank you.
Das Wort hat jetzt für die fraktionslosen Abgeordneten Herr van der Stoep.